It was just another typical night when the mysterious woman arrived at Sarah's door. No one had expected anyone, but there she stood, pale and soaked from the rain, with a strange expression that felt like it pierced through to Sarah's soul. The woman didn't speak at first. She just stared, her eyes filled with some unspoken sorrow. Sarah, being the kind-hearted person she was, let her inside, thinking the stranger needed shelter. But once she did, everything changed. The woman never spoke, never moved, and even when Sarah tried to speak to her, it felt like her voice was swallowed by some unseen force. Hours passed in a heavy silence, just as Sarah decided to call the police. The woman stood up and walked to the door. That's when the real horror started. As soon as the woman touched the door, Sarah noticed something. Her reflection in the window was not hers. Her own reflection was still standing inside the house, staring back at her. It wasn't until Sarah turned back around that she realized her guest was gone, vanished. No trace, no rain-soaked footsteps, nothing. It was as if she had never been there at all. The next morning, Sarah went to check the front porch, and there, in the dirt, was a single handprint. The kind of handprint that had been made by someone long gone. For years, Marcus drove along the same highway every night to get home from his late shifts. It was the loneliest stretch of road in the country, winding through forests and isolated towns. He had gotten used to the quiet and the occasional strange sound in the woods, but this time, something was different. It started when he noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, just ahead of the curve. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, but as he got closer, he realized it was something much more unsettling. A woman in a tattered dress, standing motionless in the middle of the night, staring right at him. Marcus slowed down, hesitant, but she didn't move. It wasn't until he was almost past her that something caught his eye, her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her face was twisted, unnaturally stretched, with hollow eyes staring back at him. When he glanced back, she was gone. He didn't stop. He drove the rest of the way home in a daze, convinced it had just been his tired mind playing tricks. But the next night, it happened again. This time, she was standing closer, her fingers brushing the edge of his car. And when Marcus looked in the rearview mirror, she whispered one chilling phrase, "I'm waiting for you." It had been a long day, and Tom was grateful for the silence of the forest surrounding his cabin. The last thing he expected was to hear whispers, soft voices fluttering through the trees. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but the more he listened, the clearer it became. The whispers were words, not of the wind, but of someone, or something, calling his name. He stepped outside, trying to locate the source of the sound. His eyes searched the forest in vain. There was no one there. The whispers grew louder, more desperate. They came from all directions, until Tom felt surrounded. And then, from behind him, a soft voice whispered right into his ear. "Tom, you shouldn't have come here." Frozen, Tom turned around slowly. A shadowy figure stood just behind him, cloaked in darkness, its face barely visible under the hood. The figure didn't move, but the air around him grew thick, suffocating. The voice whispered again, this time colder. "You've been marked." As the figure stepped closer, Tom felt something cold and sharp brush against his skin, as if it were a knife, but there was no physical touch. The whispering grew louder, more frantic, and then, complete silence. Tom ran back to the cabin, locking the doors, but the whispers followed him, echoing in his mind, filling his every thought. The figure had been waiting. Jacob had heard rumors about Hollow Creek for years. It was said to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who had disappeared there long ago. But as a skeptic, Jacob always dismissed these stories as mere superstition. That was until he decided to camp there alone. As he set up his tent and started the campfire, the evening air was thick with a strange quietness, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The farther Jacob ventured into the woods to gather firewood, the deeper the silence became. And then he saw it. An old, decayed house, half sunken into the ground, hidden among the trees. It had been abandoned for decades, but the windows were cracked, and the door swung open with a creak. Despite every instinct in him screaming to leave, Jacob entered the house, curious to see what lay inside. As he walked through the dusty, decrepit rooms, he heard something, the sound of slow footsteps echoing behind him. He spun around, but there was nothing there. The footsteps continued, getting louder, closer. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath quickened. He ran back to the door, but when he reached for the handle, it slammed shut in his face. He turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes, his face twisted in a grotesque grin. With a voice that was barely a whisper, the figure spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The door flew open, and Jacob ran into the night, the sound of footsteps behind him never ceasing. By the time he made it out of the forest, the house was gone, vanished into thin air, as if it had never existed. But the whispering voices would haunt him forever.